Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the last CSS class. And after tonight's class, hopefully everyone will have enough information to complete assignment 2. And at the end of tonight's chat, I would like everybody to ask as many assignment-related questions as possible. This week I've been helping quite a few people who've been having some problems with layout, and I've kept saying, "Oh, tonight we're going to cover a lot of these topics, so please come along." But I am hoping some people might raise some questions so that I'm reminded what to say. So tonight's chat is more focused on the layout. Actually, I think I've opened up the wrong week. Let me just get that right. Oh no, it is week 6. I just noticed before another staff member's just come through and renamed all the directories, so I've just been recovering a little bit. So so the first question is regarding basically styling text with different sort of text styles, and I'd just quite like you guys to maybe give me some answers. So how would you style these properties using CSS? So the first thing we've got is text color. So if I want to make it red or blue, what CSS style would I type into my style sheet? Okay, Aramith is saying unordered list. Yeah, that if I wanted an unordered list looking like this, that's definitely what I'd type. But we're looking for CSS styles, so I might say something like P and something inside the paragraph, just to make that paragraph text a certain color. Miroslav's got it. Is it Darren till the sky falls down? Font color is an obvious guess. It would actually make sense. I think it was just one of those things that color was chosen very early, and then obviously somebody thought about it and said, "Oh, do you know what? It might be better to specify exactly what we're coloring." So because we got background color, border color, all sorts of different colors. The only thing we don't specify is it's actually text color. So yeah, it is Darren, isn't it? Till the sky falls down. It's just one of those quirks that it was the first style to be created, and I think afterwards they realized, oh wait, that's probably not a good idea. Oops, it's too late now. So Miroslav is saying the use of American English annoys me. I just want to point out that the original Latin spelling is what the Americans follow. So at some point, English messed it up and put in a U for color, color. But just want to reassure everyone that originally, back in Rome, back in the day, it was spelt C-O-L-O-R. So what type of font is required? Well, and I will say the reason why I've deliberately spelt everything using C-O-L-O-R is because in the past, a number of people on the exam who would say Kalawa was quite high. And it's kind of difficult because it's technically an incorrect answer, but we can see what you're doing. So I've tried to be as consistent with the spelling as possible, just so that you don't make mistakes on the exam. but that's a thing. So type of font. So if I want to change the font, and I am seeing a lot of people are using web fonts. So a lot of the assignments I've been looking at this week, you've all found web fonts. And I just want to make it clear that it's not just token fonts. What I'm looking for is the vast majority of your fonts should be styled using at least 2 web fonts. So if you're using one for headings and one for main text, make sure all of your main text, whether it's navigation, main, footer, and header, make sure all of your fonts is one type of a web font. So Darren Miloslav, very close. Andres has got it. It's font-family. And you specify if you like the first font. If this font is available, please use it. But if that font's not available, have a look for this one. You know, that's pretty good. But if that doesn't work, then pretty much every browser recognizes serif. But these days, it's very unusual for a browser not to have Times New Roman or Arial. And many years ago, there was a bit of a joke about how essentially the entire web was either in Arial or Times New Roman. And there was some sort of joke at a fonts award, like a sort of Emmys for fonts, that Arial still takes out the, #1 web presence prize. But I just want to make it clear that these days, let me just pull up the search. It might be one word. Oh no, one word's good. We are able to bring in, if we have the font, we can actually push that font down onto a customer's computer, just like an image, by basically including a link to either a free font at Google. And once we've done that, we can then just include that font family inside a style, just like I've done here. But if you have a font already, I think it's family. Font face, that's what I'm looking for. If you have a font on your machine, or if you like, on the server, you can specify this font face rule. So you say what you will be calling it, and you say where it's located. So it might be located in A2/fonts. Wherever it's located, just provide the reference where it lives, and then you can specify later on in your code where that font is located, and then you'll be able to download a particular font that you've acquired. One issue, just make sure any fonts you do acquire, and this is true of images and also any copy that you might steal, source from the internet. Make sure you cite your sources and say you're using it for educational purposes, and usually that will get you out of trouble. But I just want to point out there are lots of free fonts for commercial and non-commercial use. So DaFont is also a very good resource for sourcing fonts, be they free or free for non-commercial use. Now, Darren is saying that you thought that the font was bold watching this on a TV, which kind of comes on to this one. So I will just sort of skim over this. So if you want to say how big a font is, you just need to say font size, I believe. Let me just check that. Sometimes it's text size. I'll just check font size. It is definitely font size. Be aware that you can specify a size that doesn't change. So if you say how many pixels a font is, it will stay that size. Centimeters, millimeters, and also point are the same. However, if you do want to have a relative size, so if you want it to be linked to its parent, you can specify EM or a percentage size or REM. And I've done this thing where I sometimes know what REM means, but I've just temporarily forgotten what REM is. Okay, so REM, thank goodness I wrote this beautiful select box. It's relative to the HTML element. So initially it's 16 point. So you can change any parent or grandparent, but it will, if you like, source the original HTML element for a sizing. So it's not dependent on any parents saying that it needs to be bigger or smaller. So I think this is relative EM units. But if you want something relative to its parent, so if you want something that continues to grow, choose this one. So these are nested divs, just so that you know, but I think REM should be all the same size. But if I increase this, this should basically hopefully make a small difference. Root EM. Oh, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I was thinking, what can R possibly stand for? So root EMs. So historically, one EM is 16 points, or 16. I think it's 16 point. But yeah, that number can change depending on how big its parent element is, and REM is how big the root element is. So boldness and slopiness, these are generally, and I'm not sure who's responsible for making this decision, but there's a lot of text styles which are based on font. So it'll be font style, font weight, but other ones will depend on text, if you like, text hyphen styles. So but so we've got font weight and font size. So we can make something bold, but if we actually want some sort of text decoration, such as underline, for some reason it's text and not font. I'm really not sure why this has happened. Text align, a lot of people are finding text align. But what I'm looking for is, so I'm just going to type italic into the search notes. And this is another one, font style. So you can either have italic fonts or oblique, not that there's much difference. To be honest, I'm really not sure what the difference between oblique and italic is, even from a semantic point of view, what the difference between the two are. So text decoration, these are done using text decoration, and drop shadows, that's where we can use a text shadow. So if I type in shadow, we can see all the styles with shadow settings. So there is a text shadow style, and sometimes, like a lot of you have found that you've got a really nice image in the background. Alexandra has just posted something very interesting, so I'm going, as has Tim. So I'm going to read that. So one thing with text shadow is sometimes you can actually make it very obvious, but sometimes if you've got a very strong image in the background and you want to lift the text up a little bit, you can drop a very subtle text shadow on your text, and that can just basically lift your text a little bit up from the background, because it's just got a little faint sort of key line on the outside of the text. A very handy style to use, even if you don't want an obvious shadow on your text. So Alexander and Tim have just posted a little bit on italic and oblique. Okay, so there is a subtle difference, which sorry, it's font style. Okay, so maybe not this font. There should be a subtle difference. So Alexander's saying that maybe in a cursive font there might be some joining, but oblique is just basically more slanting. Okay, so I'll bear that in mind. That's good to know. So at the moment, you could say that this font at the moment is not italic because it's not joined up writing, perhaps. Another thing, I think I do cover this in the TLDR lecture. You're not just restricted to bold and light. We have actually 9 levels. There's a historical thing. I think there used to be 9 maybe font weights in a set. So back when we had little metal characters that you put into a printing machine, so you can choose between 100, 9, and 100. Not all of them work. You might find 100 and 200 are the same, but theoretically, there is a possibility for 900 different levels of boldness. And many fonts will have, say, 3, maybe sometimes even 4. So it's a good thing to play around with these. Sometimes you can make a boring font look quite exciting, or make a complicated font readable just by giving it some extra weight. Another thing you can do is spacing between letters and lines. Sometimes you can find a font that looks really good, but the spacing is just a little bit off, and you can adjust the spacing between letters and lines. So if your lines need tightening up, you just need to play around with line height. And if the spacing between letters is a bit much, you can either tighten that up or shrink it down. Now, one thing I just want to bring up this. A lot of people have discovered text align equals left or right or centered, just bear in mind that in most Western languages, we write left to right. So if you don't specify anything, things will be left aligned. You don't need to specify that it is to be left aligned. But be mindful that sometimes some people will be looking at your website in countries where text goes from right to left. So if you specify text align equals left, that will mean that their alignment will be broken. So that's just something to be aware of. You should really only use text align equals left if there's a very good reason for you doing such a thing. Center text is quite good for headings, but I will say it's not very good for readable text. So if you've got your main sort of body copy, readable text centered, just be aware that the left and right sides are quite jagged and it can look a little unprofessional. So I strongly recommend if you want alignment, left and right, I would choose justified alignment, just so that the left and right sides of your text are aligned. So I think I've covered this. So before HTML5, we were really stuck with fonts. If a client's computer didn't have a particular font we wanted, we had to supply a fallback. So we might go for some fancy font, but if that doesn't work, then we might go for Times New Roman. If that one doesn't work, then we'd fall back to a serif font. But these days, there are ways of pushing exotic fonts onto our customers' computers. And in the assignment, I do have a mark for this. So it's not just for inclusion of web fonts, it's also to make sure that all or 95% of your fonts are being styled using using a web font or a font face rule font. So are there any questions regarding styling text? So this is not only font choice or bold choice, but also color, boldness, slopiness, and spacing between letters and lines. So Miroslav saying not at the moment. And I think most of the questions I've had were more related to layout. So yeah, I'm just trying to recall some of the questions I've been asked this week, and I think everyone might be on top of this. The only thing I saw was not everyone was using web fonts extensively. I think that was the only criticism I've had of assignments that I've seen so far. So the next thing we can do is color. So when you say color something, that's setting, if you like, the color of the text. But the color of the background, it's quite simple. It's really just background hyphen color. And we can set the background color using a named color, which I strongly recommend you try and stay away from, because you might just be selecting colors because of their names. Like, I know the color red, so I'll say the background is red. Or I know the color blue, so I'll say blue. Just try as much as possible to try and pick colors either using RGB values, so hexadecimal values, which we looked at last week, or if you're looking at a color scheme, the HSL model works really well because you can pick a hue and choose different shades of that hue, so they will never or very rarely clash. I have noticed in the yellow area, it turns into gold and brown very quickly. But most of the colors with HSL, if you pick a particular shade or hue, then when you increase the lightness and the saturation, you can get a range of colors that don't clash with the hue that you picked. And when we looked at the RMIT's style guide, which keeps getting bigger, you'll notice that what they do is they specify, even though it might be in RGB values, it has the same hue, but there's different sort of lightness and intensities of that color. So Andres has asked a good question. So when doing black or white text, do you mind the name colors? That's not such a bad thing, I will say. So black, there's only one way to say black. You know, it's #000 or #6 zeros. White as well, #FFF or the word white. So black and white, yeah, that's pretty okay. When you're saying gray, you know, if you say dark gray or light gray, it's a little bit ambiguous. So let me just so you know, one person's idea of dark gray might be #222, but someone else might think that you know, like this dim gray, like what is dim gray? You know, I have a feeling it might be 444. We can always cheat. We can just inspect this. Oh, it's actually #777. So just so that's almost halfway there. So when it comes to even grayscale, it's a good idea to specify the color so you know roughly, you know, is it a darker gray, a dim gray, or a faint gray, or an off-white gray, something like this. This is where colors become far more important. And of course, when it comes to colors, so purple. So to make purple, I just, you know, decrease the green channel. And to make green, I just decrease the red channels. But saying what flavor this green is, you might say summer olive leaf or something. That's really not very helpful. It's much easier to specify the name of the color. And aramith colors can appear very different based on their surrounds. So I forgot to copy an image. There's an image doing the rounds at the moment if you're on Facebook, where there's different colored balls. Has anyone seen this? So there's a yellow ball and a blue ball and a green ball and a red ball, but they're actually all the same color because the background's different. And that's a very interesting field of study as well. So sometimes when you pick a color for text and a background color, the text color does seem to change because humans tend to process color relatively. So we adjust for shadows and things like that. And yeah, it's quite a curious thing. I might actually hunt around and try and find that image. But there's a couple of images that I'll hunt around for and have a look for. I think there's a classic one of a chessboard where a cylinder is casting a shadow, and the white square in the shadow is the same color as the dark square not in the shadow. It's quite surprising to see. One thing, if you specify a background image and a background color together, the image is put on top of the background color. So imagine you're a teenager and you've got a poster of some boy band or girl band up on your wall. Really, the background color won't show through. So it seems a little bit stupid. Why would you specify a background color? But if there's any transparency in the image or any holes in the image, if the transparency is 100%, then the color of the background can come through. And in the lecture notes, I do have an example of where a translucent image is allowing some of the color to come through. And you can create some smart effects combining a background image and a background color together. In fact, I'm not 100% sure if it's this period, but I saw a very nice effect. Someone had put in a background, it's like a background image that was a bit of a stencil, and it had a sort of a linear gradient in the background, and it looked very smart, and it was very easily put together as well. Another thing which may not be obvious is when you choose a background image, your first thing might be the complete wall covering image, which goes over the whole element. However, you can specify a small image to appear, say, just in the bottom corner or just in the top corner. There's lots of different ways of setting an image. So what I'm talking about is repeating, like tiling images, or you might just want a watermark in the bottom corner, or in the assignment, what I want you to do is set the background position to be fixed, so that you've got a parallax scrolling effect, which is quite good. One question I was asked actually, I can't remember who this was. I'm just wondering whether it was. Let me just scroll through the list of who's here. I'm not seeing a face I recognize. But I was asked a question, where's the alt tag in a background image? And because a background image is considered to be purely CSS, that is decoration, there is no alt tag. So if anyone's a little bit stuck on that, I just want to reassure you that when it comes to CSS, there are no alt tags. So if you've got an image in your web page because it's relevant content, so an actual image of the seats that are being upgraded, then that's an example of where an image is content. But if it's in the background, there is no alt tag. There is no need for an alt tag because it is considered purely decoration. And Timothy's just pointed out that screen readers will ignore background images unless they've been programmed differently. I do know someone who's completely blind. As I said, my brother suffers. He's legally blind, but he's not completely blind. So he tends to turn off all the background image settings. But just knowing what images are representing when they're part of the content is quite helpful. So knowing there's a pizza image when he's ordering pizza does assist him. So linear gradients and radial gradients. I'll throw that question over to you guys. So it's the clue is in the title. And to get a linear gradient, you just put a hyphen between linear gradient and radial gradient. But both can be used to create, if you like, a blending of colors. So you can have like a smooth blending of colors, or if you want, you can have hard stripes. And if you play around with the settings a little bit, you can get some kind of you can get some other effects. So I've actually got I'll let you work out whether this is a linear gradient or a radial gradient, but this is essentially one of those gradients that's happening here. And what I've got is a very small strip of gray and a big strip of white, and it's repeating. And Miroslav has just added that he guesses that's why background color is used even with images set. Yeah, that's also another thing. It's a good idea to have a background image, know what color the wallpaper is. Sorry, the wall is before you put the paper on top. Because the other thing is, sometimes your image server might not be working as fast as it should be, and it's good to get a reasonably looking page downloaded first. And Darren spotted out basically anything that's circular. That's a radial gradient. Linear, that's like a sort of left to right or up to down sort of gradient. And there's two types of those. It can either repeat, so it'll keep repeating over, say, 10% of your image if you want it to be relative. But if you want it to be repeating over a number of pixels, you can specify the number of pixels as well. Now, moving on to the box model. How are people finding the box model? So every element on a page is considered to be square in nature. So you might have rounded corners, as we see down here, but essentially any piece of content, whether it's a paragraph or a heading or a div, or even a span inside a div or a paragraph, everything is seen to be in a box. So it'll have a top, a bottom, a left, and a right. And we can put in some padding. We can put a border or a box around something. And we can put in some margin so that it keeps itself away from neighboring elements. So I'll ask a quick question, and hopefully you'll think about whenever you're getting a package from Amazon or eBay or something through the internet, what's the difference between margin and padding? So Tim's saying margin is outside the border, and Miroslav almost straight away. Padding is the space inside the box. So if you can remember those two things, that is extremely will be extremely helpful. So padding, I often think about those ecologically unfriendly polystyrene chips, which you know, I'm glad companies have stopped using them. I'm getting more and more. There's a new sort of type of padding, which is like a sort of it's like a sort of fluffy cardboard. I don't quite know how they're making it, but padding goes inside, and margin is outside, which is keeping elements away from each other. So there's honestly, I was helping them today. I'm just going to Honorata, are you here tonight? Just scrolling through the list of chats. So as I said, I've been helping a few students this week, and if you find that if you're putting lots of BRs in between elements, what's happening is a screen reader will just read out those BRs to the user. So BR, BR, BR. They really don't need to know that you want to press the Enter key 3 times like you're in Microsoft Word. So the better way of putting distance between elements is to adjust the margin margin bottom or margin top on elements. And if you one of the tricks with adjusting margin is if you use, say, a general style and you put a margin, say, top on all of the elements, but you don't want the first element to have a margin on the top, you can style the first child to not have a margin on the top. So that's a little trick I can be used. Or I think the other way around. If you want the last child to not have a margin on the bottom, you can then style the last child not to have a margin on the bottom. So in between the margin and the padding, there is this thing called the border, which I like to think is if you like, the cardboard box that things are in. So some items in the post, they'll have a fairly thin border. They might be even just a sort of plain paper envelope. But other more sturdy things, they'll need a thicker border. So I want to draw your attention because I have seen this this popping up. So I've just typed in box because I'm looking for the box model. So there's a whole section understanding the box model. I am aiming for the particular slide that I'm looking for. Oh, I helped a student with this today. You might have a logo, logo image. I'm just going a little bit off track, and you've got some text, and you really want to say Leonardo Cinema, but you want it to be up here. The trick is to style the image. And I created this slide because I'm always forgetting how to do this. So if you actually style the image to be in the middle, your text will be centered vertically with the image. So I've seen quite a few websites at the moment where the text is on the bottom. So it's like that. And just want to reassure you that it's quite simple to align the image. This is what you have to do. You have to align the image to be centered with the text. So that's just a quick thing that I saw as I was scrolling. Text indent. So Miroslav saying, oh, cool. Fantastic. So what I've got is I've got these box model examples, I've just chosen a very, cardboard looking color. So brown's pretty close to cardboard. You can see the padding is inside, and there's a little bit of margin around it. I've even got these little triad editors so you can practice. But this is a problem that I'm seeing in a couple of websites, that the header is one side and then the navigation is almost the same size, but it's just a little bit bigger. It's just a couple of pixels bigger. And then the main section is another size. And this is due to, I'll just shrink all this out of the way. This is due to a decision that was made in CSS version 2, that the size of a box, when you specify size, what we're specifying is the size of the content. So if you imagine you're ordering say a 70-inch television from, I don't know, Kogan or JB Hi-Fi or something like that. Yes, the television is 70 centimeters, 70 inches across the diagonal. However, you've got the frame on top of that, and then you've got the padding in the box, and then you've got the size of the box as well. And if you're trying to cram this into your tiny car, maybe you've got a Mini or something. Although Minis are pretty big these days. What's a good small car? I'm just trying to think. All the cars I know, they just keep getting bigger. I'm sure there are some small cars out there. But the problem is, of course, if you want to know how big the element is physically, if you like how big is the box? When we're trying to fit a box into our car, we want to know how big is the box. We don't care about the margin. The margin is just space between elements. Yes, we've got a 70-inch television, but the box is going to be 80 or 90 inches. So when CSS3 came along, we realized that this was a problem. And so a different model, there was a new attribute that was created called the box sizing model. So we can specify that it's going to be the content box. So how big is the content? Or we can specify how big if you like, how big is the box that I'm trying to cram into the back of my Golf, as Miroslav has just pointed out. Darren's just pointed out something. I like to think of a cactus wearing a poncho. I'm reading that, and I'm not sure if I'm not stoned enough to get that, Darren. Is there an acronym or anything? Is that what I'm missing? I'll let Darren sort of make me look like an idiot and explain what he's just posted. So yeah, I just want to draw your attention. A lot of people are having different size boxes, so their headings and mains are looking slightly different sizes. But if you assign all of your elements to have the box sizing border box model, they will then all become the same size. So this box here, the width is 100%, and it will always be off screen because the content is 100%. Whereas this box here, the width is 100%. I'm totally intrigued by what Darren's posted. So cactus, poncho, Bolero, America. I'll probably watch this video and feel like a complete edit. Oh, so it's just a mental picture. It's not like an was it anagram or something? You should send me a picture. I'm actually just writing the exam. I might pop that picture on the exam if you can get it to me in time. Equals margin. Oh, the starting letter is the same. Okay. Ah, yes, I think I'm going to get it. Okay. I will come back to this, but I think, yeah, I think I see it now. Yes, cool. Make me look like an idiot. No, it's cool. I'm happy. Yeah, so this box model attribute, which came in CSS3, so it's probably getting on for 10 years old now. Maybe not exactly 10 years old yet. But then there's this, if you like, silver bullet style. And trust me, I use this a lot. Sometimes there are just some subtle differences. Like things will be like a pixel out and it'll be very frustrating. And what you can do, particularly if you've got some margin, so notice I've got some margin in this example, you can use the calc to say, I want the width to be 100%, but I want to take off 2 lots of the margin. So you can say 2 times 30 pixels, because 30 pixels is the margin. One thing with the calc, whatever engine breaks down this string, it's reliant on spaces. So if anyone's done Java, and we will be using when we look at PHP, there are functions which will break a big string into lots of little strings, and that's definitely what's happening. So whenever you're writing your calculation, make sure you put some spaces in, because browsers will break up the string into little bits and then work out how big you want your width to be. If there's no spaces in there, it will just throw an error. And Darren, no apologies. I was thinking I must be missing it, because it definitely looks good. I think if you don't send me a picture, I will make one up. I've actually think I've got the exam deadline maybe tonight. I'm not 100% sure, but I might sneak one in. So if I can get it in time. Yeah, so the calc function I do use a lot, even for like little fine tuning. Sometimes I'm a pixel out, or a side for some reason just looks bigger, even though the number of pixels is the right size. There's just some psychology things that if you look at something, there are some letters which are deliberately off center because the human eye processes it as being on center for some reason. So sometimes the calc function does come in handy, just getting things pixel perfect. So that's the border thickness. So honestly, border weight, border color, hyphen color. Most of these font styles are self-explanatory. My only frustration is sometimes, there's a weight, hyphen weight, or a hyphen thickness. But it's usually one. If you get it wrong the first time, it's usually easy to sort of guess it the second time. But if you ever do get stuck, just come here and type the word into the search bar. This is what I do, and you might find the correct style that you're looking for. And another thing in CSS3, we can take the edges off the corners so we can sort of smooth them out a little bit. Just say the corner radius, or sorry, border radius. One piece of advice I just want to give you is if you do put corners on your boxes, it's a good idea to put a little bit of extra padding inside your divs or your spans. Otherwise, that sort of shaving can cut into your text. So I always find that for every two pixels of border radius, it's always a good idea to put at least one, usually 2 pixels of padding, extra padding inside. And drop shadows, we can pop drop shadows on boxes. It's not just text, just to sort of give something a 3D effect. And I think I've got some garish examples. Let me just so I've got a box shadow on this. I've got some text shadow on this, and I've even got a filter. Maybe, yeah, I think it's on this one. There's even a image filter, popping a drop shadow on this image, which has got some transparency in this image. Have I? Oh, it's definitely more obvious here, though. So there's quite a few filters. So you don't need to jump into Photoshop at every opportunity. You can actually desaturate an image. So if you want a black and white version of your image, you can actually use the same image and put a filter on it. Other things you can do with filters is invert them. So if you want a negative version, you can invert them. And you can even adjust blur and sharpness. You can do all sorts of crazy things with filters. And one thing I've really just discovered, even though it's been around for a while, you can put text, and this is something, honestly, I've only just discovered. You can pop text into a box and then style the text so that it cuts a hole in the box and lets the background of whatever's underneath the box come through, which I wasn't even aware. It's you're actually turning the text into a mask and basically allowing the background to come through. So that's just something I noticed the other day, and I'm really surprised it's taken me this long to even notice that it's available. So lots of things we used to have to do in Photoshop are now being transferred into CSS. Aha, the box model. So I do cover the box model in detail. So I've got a couple of examples. As I've sort of been saying for the last couple of weeks, these obviously my name would go there, I guess. But what I'm doing is I am collecting your answers to tutorial exercises each week, so that if your final grade is on the borderline and I can see that you've been actively working all semester, I can give you some makeup marks just to put your mark over into the next bracket. So that might be a fail to pass level, or even credit to distinction level. So I've got some exercises for you to have a go with. This one I've already covered. So what differences does that make? And I've got here this. This is also very relevant for the assignment, which some of you have noticed with the now showing section. So where you've got the movie, you've got, say, an image on the left and some times on the right. You want the box, say, to be, say, 50% of the width of the parent element, but you don't want it to get crunched down beyond a certain point. So you want the minimum size to be, in this case, 600 pixels, but you might find that needs to be bigger or smaller. And likewise, you don't want something to get bigger than, say, 1800 pixels. Again, that number might be different. And so this is one way of making sure your content will rescale. So you might get 2 boxes on a large screen, or even 3 boxes up. But on a smaller screen, they will reflow because the minimum width will stop the boxes from shrinking beyond a certain point. Margin zero auto. This is a bit of an obscure style, but this allows an inline block to this allows a block to automatically calculate the left and right margins. So 0 represents the top and bottom dimensions, and auto will allow the left and right sides to be automatically calculated. So what will happen is this box will try and be centered inside its parent element, and will either grow and shrink depending on how big the parent element is, but it will never be bigger than this, and it will never be smaller than this size. So are there any questions about how this element works? Whilst you're doing that, I might actually just load up another page I want to present. And I've got another example down here, which is doing something a little bit more specialized using the calc function. And I should really be consistent with the spacing here. I think I'd definitely fail programming techniques. Guyan would be very unhappy with me. Or intro to programming. I can't remember what Guyan teaches now. So whilst I'm waiting for some questions or some feedback with this, I want to show you something that is technically not part of the course, but I would like it to be part of the course, and also it's quite relevant for modern web programming practices. So I'm about to show you something that's optional that you might like to investigate, but I just want to make it clear it is additional material to the course. So what I've got here is I've actually got a page which you might see looks similar to the now showing areas. So you've got an image on the left and some text floating on the right. And if I make this screen a little bit bigger, we get 3 up, and we get 2 up, and we get 1 up. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually using media queries. So this is the CSS, and what I've done is, this is a fairly small example, and I'll post the link so you can all get access. I've seen quite a few of you have already found this page and are having a play with this, so I thought there's enough of you playing with this for me to demonstrate. So really what it is, I've just got basically some divs, just some dummy divs. And first of all, what I do is I apply these styles to all elements, and I'm trying to sort of stick with a mobile first programming paradigm, I think is the right way to say it. So what I'm doing is I'm assuming that the device that needs the least work to do is a mobile phone, which is 100% true, because otherwise mobile phones will burn through all their battery. So these were the styles. So when I'm programming, I think this is what a mobile phone wants. And so this is actually, if you like, a layout size. So Darren's asking a question. I will come back to you in a moment. So what I'm doing is, the default is I want elements to be 100% of the width minus 20 pixels, because I want a little bit of padding. I'll make this really small. So I want the width of this div to be 100% minus the margin. Sonia, I'm not sure if I've been talking to you this week, Sonia. I think I have promised a couple of people I would be talking about this tonight. So I'm not sure if you're one of the students I've been promising this to. So if you're not, I'm sure there are plenty out there who are going, oh, cool. So what I'm doing is I've decided I want the width to be 100%, but minus 10 pixels left and right. And it's centering quite nicely, because and I'm using these direct descendants. So any div that's an immediate descendant of body, I want to have these styles. So I'm displaying it as an inline block so that it will reflow if there's enough room, but it won't break apart. Now, if the width gets a little bit bigger, and also if it's a screen, so if I'm printing this on paper, I don't want this to apply. So if it's a screen that the content is being rendered on, and the size is more than 500 pixels, so it's hit 501, then I actually want it to be 50%. But then I want to take off 16 pixels. Now, why have I chosen 16? That's a really good question. So what I want is, I want this, this, and this to be the same. Now, theoretically, this should be... Now, the thing with margins is margins collapse. So if I've got say a 10 pixel margin on this side and a 10 pixel margin on this side, they will actually collapse, and there will only be 10 pixels of margin here. So it's actually, this style, for some reason, I would think it should be 15, if I got that right. But when I plugged in 15, it didn't really work. So I popped in 16 because it was at 1 pixel out, and I wasn't 100% sure why that was. So 3 into 16 goes 5 for some reason. Now that I think about it, might be padding. I'm not 100% sure, but this is just an example of me too long ago for me to remember. I didn't leave enough comments for future me to understand what I was doing, but I was doing this by eye, and I was just picking these pixel values by eye. So I would have thought that that would have been 15, but 16 seemed to be working a lot better. And then when we come to three panels, so once we get above 1,000 pixels, now another thing, I specified this one first. So even though this one applies, this one is going to override this once it gets above 1,001 pixels. If I was to reverse the order of these two, this one would always apply once you're above 501 pixels, but this one applies. This one is going to override this style. If I wanted to be professional, I might specify an and max width, but I've been a little bit lazy there. So Miroslav, yeah, it's honestly, I was doing this with pencil and paper, I remember many years ago, and for some reason, yeah, there just seemed to be one extra pixel on this side than the other. In fact, now that I look at it, I'm beginning to think there is one extra pixel on this side. Maybe there was a bug and that 16 pixel was fixing it, and now it's fixed. I've got a feeling it's fixed, or it may even be the borders. It may have been the borders that I was putting in. I'm not sure. Anyway, I just want to point out that sometimes it's not perfect. It can be frustrating. And I've got 13 pixels here. So instead of typing 33.333333%, I've just said 100% divided by 3, because I know that will be calculated properly, and I've just taken off 13 pixels when we get to that size. But in the assignment, really what I'm looking for is, say, 2 panels up on a large screen and 1 panel on a narrow screen. And I'm just checking the conversations. Honorata, if I'm saying that name correctly, I was advising Honorata today that she's using media queries, but they were snapping a little bit too late, so her content was getting a little bit crushed, and then it was fine. So she might have been she might have had a minimum width, say maybe at 500 pixels, and just increasing that to 600 might, just that extra 100 pixels might well fix her problem. So if you're here, Honorata, give a bit of a wave, but if you're watching offline, I hope that helps you out. So I don't really mind if you don't want to use media queries, just use inline blocks and do the just pop on these properties. The numbers may well be different, but this goes some way into helping you out. But if you want that perfect solution where you get something like this, media queries is one of the more efficient ways of doing it if you're not playing around with the flex or grid model, which I must make a mental note to make sure we get time to cover. And I'm coming up to activity 4, and I've already seen a few cases of where this is happening. So a lot of people are finding that their layout is getting destroyed and they don't know why, they don't know what's causing it. So I would like to spend a little bit of time on this. So I'll just field any questions. If anyone's got any questions about the previous sections, just yell out, and I will have a look out in the comments for that. And I'll just go through, because I think a couple of comments have come through that I've missed. So Darren, you were asking a question. So I will say it is optional to do this for section 4.3. You can get away with not doing it. You can use the more sort of, I don't want to say low grade, low tech solutions. As long as what I'm looking for is your page does adapt. It may not be completely responsive to mobiles or narrow screens, but I just want to see that the content doesn't get crushed up or stretched out on large screens. But it is something that I'm definitely pushing. I really would like. The trouble is, this course does try to cram in a little bit too much content, I think, into the course, and I think there's a lot that can be done in. There's a lot of CSS styles that really help with layout, and also there's quite a few cute animation styles as well, which we obviously do not have time to get into. So if you want some transitions, so when you mouse over something, some things can fade in and fade out. There's lots of styles these days, which we unfortunately just don't have time to cover. So this mug is definitely CSS2 is awesome because before CSS, everyone used tables for layout. Something which, definitely try and plug, saying do not use tables for layout. Tables are bad unless it is tabular data. CSS was supposed to fix, provide an alternative to tables, but CSS2 definitely failed to deliver. And we got effects like this where content just escaped from its containers. In tables, this never happens. The cells just automatically grow and accommodate the content. So it's really not until CSS3 and even the grid and float layout that, the flex layout, that these problems were addressed. But what can happen is there's lots of examples, and W3 Schools is quite guilty of this, telling you to float elements left. So any element you want, float it left, just float it left. And what they don't tell you is it's going to destroy your layout. And just before, when I was getting set up, I've received an email from someone. If you're here tonight, I promise you I will respond to you shortly. The footer is rising up, and it's doing what this footer is doing at the moment. The content of the page, the main element, is escaping and covering up the footer. So this is what happens when you use float. Float is very good. It floats something, say, to the left, and text then floats around. But the trouble is every single element that follows will try and float around that element. And you do get these floating collision problems. So there is a style, and I will open it up here. I'll try that again. So what you do need, you need to, if you like, this turns something on. This turns a floating style on, and this turns it off. So if you float an image left, everything will try and float around that image and will start colliding with other elements. So at some point you will need to introduce an element which sometimes is empty, and it will turn that floating off. And I've got an example. You just have to type in mug. Okay, not that one. So I've sort of tried to represent it here. So you can see that this element here, the mugs are starting to collide and overtake this element. But if I pop in a clear both style to these paragraphs, they will do what, I might think this is what I was expecting them to do. So I want the image to float left, and then I want the text to float around it, and then at some point I want it to stop. And then the next element floats left, and then this content floats around it, and then it stops, and so forth. And there's no collision. Take that clear both option off, and then I start getting this collision again. And Darren has asked, or Darren is stating, actually, I'll come to you, Tim, in a moment. So Darren, yeah, so this is also, you can actually see this in Microsoft Word. So if you ever click on an image and say float this image left, the text will float around it on the right. It's something that even though you're applying it to one element, it really affects the rest of the page. It's almost like you're selecting everything that comes after that element to float in the opposite direction. And if you actually, I might just turn, if you like, a wireframe. I'll put a like, if you like, a sort of wireframe light style on these. So that's an article. Let me just yeah, so what I've got is this paragraph. I'm going to pop a border on it. I'll say 2 pixels. So what's happening is this paragraph, because it's got a floating element inside it, the size of this paragraph has actually collapsed. And if I turn that off, hopefully. Okay, didn't quite work. But if you ever get this problem, you can pop a border onto the element you think is in trouble, and you can actually see that it generally collapses. Sometimes it turns into a single line, and basically all the content. So this is inside this dotted paragraph, as is this image, but it has escaped from the it has escaped from its parent, essentially. So this is actually, this is not as bad an example as I was hoping. It seems to be working quite well, unfortunately. So I'll pop that back on. And this is the thing of getting a lot of people asking me about the wireframe style. Why is it there? It's, first of all, it's quite good for markers, so we can click on the wireframe style sheet just to see that you've structured your content well. So it just sort of helps us, if we can get a quick visual of what your page structure looks like, we know what to go looking for in your code. We're not sort of like looking at your code unaided. And also it's quite good because we can see, let's just say, some double bagging. Some people are putting divs inside divs, even though it's not really necessary. Again, a W3 Schools thing that I'll come back to in a moment. We can give you some sort of immediate feedback on what we're seeing. But the other thing is, your wireframe styles, if you want to inspect something and you're not quite sure how to do it, you can basically copy the code out of wireframe.css just temporarily to highlight something you're working on, and see what's going wrong with your code. So don't be shy about copying styles out of wireframe.css temporarily just to do some debugging. And also sometimes you'll want to turn your wireframe style on just to see what's going wrong with your code. Now, Tim's just pointed some things out, and what you're saying is actually quite true. And it's one of these things that it's not really a black and white issue. It's more of a sort of grayscale issue, shades of gray issue, I think. The W3 Schools website is very good. It's got, it definitely helps beginners get to like a intermediate or even advanced intermediate stage. And a lot of their pages, I do find that their pages sometimes do get a refresh. So they'll be explaining how to program with a HTML5 paradigm. And they'll even say things like you shouldn't be doing these things. And then you'll go to another page which hasn't been updated, and it's basically got, it was written in 2005 and it still has 2005 relevant content. So there's a couple of tutorials which tells you to float things left and to put divs inside divs unnecessarily. And this was before CSS3 really took hold. And also and I will put my hand up here. I have posted a link to the parallax effect, and their example does have a lot of divs nested in divs, which is not necessary because you can just basically get the CSS and apply that CSS directly to the element you're using. So I just want to say, on one hand, my bad. When I directed you to the page, I just wanted you to obviously recognize it was 10 years old, and to just go in and just see how they're doing it and just copy out a minimum amount of code. But Darren's just pointed out so Darren's saying the parallax effects requires empty divs. That's not actually true. You can just basically put in a background image into an element you want, and just change the background image position or display to be static, and instead of it scrolling with the page, sorry, with the window, it will actually stay fixed relative to the window. So I've got a feeling, Darren, if I've seen your website, I think I've got a feeling I might like your website the way you've done it. But I just want you to be aware that you can attach, you can make any background image have the parallax effect without too much overhead. And thanks to Andres for posting the solution there. I'll let you get away with that for the moment. Yeah, so there's another style of parallax where it actually changes a little bit. So the Apple website is a website that just immediately comes to mind, that as you're scrolling, you may be scrolling at, say, 3 lines at a time, but its background images will scroll at a slower pace. So it's almost as though you're staring into the distance. That requires a lot of work. I'm not expecting anyone to do that, but I will be very impressed if anyone does. But don't attempt that unless you're really bored with the assignment and you just want to try something different. So at the moment, I'm just really looking for static images. And I'm quite sympathetic that a lot of tutorial exercises do have a lot of double bagging, so divs inside divs. And so I'll probably just provide formative advice saying that you can achieve the same result with less bagging. So it'll probably just be I'll just say what you can with words, not with marks. So Tim's asking, can we do this subtle, this sort of advanced CSS parallax? Sorry, can we do this advanced parallax effects only using CSS? I've got a feeling that you can't. I think that is at the moment still a JavaScript effect. In the past, the parallax effect could only be achieved, I think, using JavaScript, but it's just something that crept into the standard. That all browsers started to implement this CSS for, say, just plain fixed elements, fixed background images. Another thing people have been asking me is, or they've noticed that the parallax effect doesn't work in their phone. That's not a problem. A lot of phones have made the decision that the parallax effect just consumes a little bit too much battery power. So it's not so important as long as it still looks good in a phone. In an actual phone, that's fine. And the probability is that in a couple of years, we might see the parallax effect being implemented in more phones. So I'm sure Tim Cook, when he gets on stage, he'll make a big thing of it when that occurs, assuming that it doesn't already occur in an iPhone, of course. So I do have this little box here saying, honestly, every now and then someone has this problem and they're not using floats, and that does confuse me because it's almost like saying, have you tried turning it off and on again? You know, have you tried turning your floats off and seeing what happens? Yeah, I think I had a student was having a layout issue. Yes, I remember now, because I was extremely confused because it wasn't a float effect. So it took me a little while to debug it, and but more often than not, let's just say, if you've got a layout issue, it's usually because something is floating and that floating effect has not been caught. Okay, so hopefully I've covered that. That said, there will be times where you're putting, you're trying to float an element, or you're trying to do something with an element and you just can't get it working. Please do not feel bad about putting those elements inside a div for logical reasons, to, in this case, keep things together. So I do say, try not to do double bagging unless it's necessary. W3 Schools has got a lot of examples where I think there's a little bit too much double bagging or even triple bagging at times. But, sometimes to create an effect, you do need to put an element inside another element. And it's still an unsolved problem for the most part, but with the flex layouts and the grid layouts, there's a lot of work being put into fixing layout issues. So in your assignment 1, your index.html file, where I've got you to list your interests, this if anyone's looking at the grid layout as an alternative to having inline blocks, I've already given you an example of a grid layout, so I might pull that up. So I'm just pulling up the GitHub page here. So if you do want to have a play with grid, what I've got here is I've got sections and I've got a div inside a div, and I've put in some artificial spacing just to show that there is a distinction. But if we actually have a look at the CSS, okay, not that one. Was it testing? Yeah, so I again, this is an optional thing that only if you're interested should you take this on. So what I'm doing is I'm saying that the container that's got all the interests, more about me, to be a grid template, and it's got some min and max features. So the first div will be this size and the second div will be this side. So I don't want either of them to be under 300 pixels, but ideally I want the leftmost div, so the question, if you like, to be 1 unit and your answer to be 3 units on larger screens. And you can specify a constant grid gap. And the grid element does solve a lot of problems. So grid is very good for 2D layouts. So if you want, left, right, top and bottom layout, the grid does work really well. But if you're just looking for a one-dimensional layout where you don't care about vertical alignment, the flex layout is also very, very handy. But I thought I'd pop that in just to give you a little bit of assistance if you're experimenting with the grid layout. Again, something I'd really like to introduce into the course. It's just there's not too much room for it. So we're not assessing you specifically on it. Now for positioning, and I'm just keeping an eye on the time here. So even though the default style for positioning is called static, that doesn't mean it's actually static on the page. Or more to the point, it's static on the page, but not static on the window. So as you scroll, it moves up and down. So all of this text is static text. It stays on the page and only moves up and down because I'm moving the cursor or the page up and down. But there's a lot of different styles, and I recommend, as much as possible, keep everything static unless there's a reason for it not being static. If you start making things absolute, one of the problems is there are some of these styles which will be aligned relative to the first parent that is not static. So that's good for menus and submenus, like drop-down menus, but you can often find that you've broken your page if you overuse absolute positioning or other types of positioning. So when you start using other types of positioning, there are these other attributes, top, bottom, left, and right, that suddenly will take on meaning. And they'll do slightly different things. So I've got a slide in the lectures that shows you the difference. So if you're using relative positioning, when you specify top, it actually pushes something down from the top. So it sort of pushes it towards the bottom, which can be a little bit confusing. But if you're using fixed positioning, so if you want something to be fixed, top represents how many pixels you want it away from the top of the window. So if you like the window frame, I want it to be near the top. And so just let you know, I've got the footer in the lecture notes. This is actually fixed. position is fixed, and I've said the bottom is 0 pixels. And so it's been positioned 0 pixels from the bottom. If I was to say bottom 5 pixels, it will actually be positioned a little bit up from the bottom, which might be a nice effect, but I've chosen not to do that. And there's a really nice effect. So at the moment, this looks as though I've said position is top, but you can see that as you scroll, it does come down from the top a little bit. And that's because this is a new style that has really only come into its own. And I just want to check that I have updated the slides. Okay, that's weird. Oh no, here it is. So in the past, what we had to do is we had to say, when we were scrolling, we had to use JavaScript to see where the, if you like, the navigation element was on the page. So its Y offset might be, say, 300 pixels. And what I had to do in the past, in fact, I've only updated this in the last year, its position would be static in this position. And then as you scroll, every time there was a scroll event, I would check to see the position of the page. And if the position of the page was above a certain number, I would then, using JavaScript, change this position to be top and the top to be 0 pixels. But there's this really nice new style called position sticky, and it does all that calculations for me. So if it's up here, it's static, but if it gets to the top of the window, it's then it's now a fixed position. Now, a couple of you have done this and found that as you kept scrolling, it would then go off screen. And this is because, and this is very important, the navigation is a child of the body element. So if I have navigation inside a div, it will stick to the top of its parent element. So if that div goes off screen, it will go off screen with the parent. And so that could be exactly what you want. So in Facebook, you can sometimes see that the right side of Facebook ads will scroll for a little bit, and then you'll get a new set of ads come up as you continue to scroll. And but if you want this effect, you've got to make sure your navigation is an immediate child of the body element. Otherwise it will go off screen at some point. Tim's saying, does it work with CSS Grid? Yeah, I think the CSS Grid as a whole, if you say if you like the parent element, let me just go back to my CSS in GitHub. So even though More About Me is, if you like, got a grid layout attached to it, if I was to say position sticky, the More About Me would also, oh look, oh actually I didn't even realize I'd done this. The body element is also a grid. I think I had some bigger plans for the A1 template. That surprises me. I thought it was just the More About Me that was displaying as grid. And keep catching myself off guard there. Yeah, I think the key, definitely the key is, you know, my navigation could be a grid, so I could have these links in a grid layout. I wonder if I have got them in a grid layout. I don't think I have. I think these are just inline blocks. The two styles are pretty much independent, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I hope that's answered your question, Tim. I think I've mumbled through it pretty badly. But yeah, both styles should be independent. The key is making sure that this element is a child of the body element. If you want it to stay on screen permanently. So yeah, this is basically the style you need for assignment 2 for the navigation bar. Is that actually, did I move that to assignment 3? I can't remember now. Did I say I wanted the navigation to stick in assignment 2? So Tim's asking, can the sticky menu be a grid item? I can't see any reason why it can't be. I might check your assignment just to make sure you're not doing anything that's tricking me into giving you a bad answer there. And another thing which you don't necessarily need in assignment 2, but it will definitely be helpful in assignment 3, is sometimes we need to make things appear and disappear. So as you click on different things, you may want, there are two ways of doing this. You can either update the content of the synopsis area, i.e. have one synopsis area and update the content. Or you might have a number of synopsis areas and make each one visible or invisible. And there's two ways of making something disappear. You can sort of go down the Harry Potter or, Frodo Bilbo route, where the thing you're making invisible is still in the scene, like it still occupies space in the scene. So you don't get any sort of text reflow or content reflow. But other times you actually want to make something literally disappear, and whatever was in that space will then flow into that space. So I've got an example here. So when the TARDIS disappears, for example, all the air that was in that space around the TARDIS flows, one would assume, flows into the space that the TARDIS leaves behind. So you can either adjust an object's visibility, so that doesn't affect layout, but there is an obvious gap where that content was. But if you want something to disappear and content to reflow, use display none. And to make it reappear, use one of these styles, depending on the status of the this style that was before. So I've got a feeling when I click on this button, let me just check. When I click on that button, no. What I'm doing is I'm setting the style of the navigation to display none because I want it to disappear. I don't want it to be invisible. And then when I want it back, I just click on this button and suddenly display block comes back again. So that's how I'm showing and hiding my navigation in the lecture notes. Oh gosh, 10 minutes to go. So let me just quickly run through the lab. So I've just got some lab exercises. So footer is fixed. So, Robert's just asked a question. Can this be done via user interaction on the page? Yes. So what I'm doing is I'm using JavaScript. So as I'm clicking a button, I'm running a little bit of JavaScript to update the navigation's style. We'll be covering this in the next 2 weeks. And I've had a few questions about the TLDR lectures. They've said, oh, where are the lectures after lecture 5? I've been really busy wrapping up semester 2 on campus, getting the exams written. But I promise you, I'm sort of like breathing a bit of a sigh of relief, and I will be right on to recording the next TLDR lectures very soon. So you can watch the Echo 360 lectures if you like. I was thinking the TLDR lectures would be shorter, but that's not really working out, unfortunately. So maybe I'll get a little bit better. Yeah, so those lectures will be coming, but I do have the Echo 360 lectures for you to look at. So Robert's saying, can we use JavaScript in assignment 2? Yeah, if you want to jump ahead and do some assignment 3 in assignment 2, you won't lose any marks at all. I just want to reassure Aramith, there is no JavaScript programming in assignment 2. So if you see anything that requires JavaScript programming, please send me an email and I'll sort of explain why it's not necessary. Tim, yeah, the on-campus lectures should be in sync, with the caveat that obviously lecture 5, the tutes and labs for lecture 5 are covered 6. Have I got that right? So there's a little bit of a shift, but if you watch week 6 lecture in week 6, you will be slightly ahead. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So on campus, what we do is obviously the first week is setting up the web server in the lab, setting up GitHub, and then from week 2 onwards, the tute and lab follow the material covered in lecture 1. And yeah, I think the syllabus, certainly I've designed everything so that the two are equivalent. Robert's asking, displaying pricing via user interaction. That's definitely assignment 3. So if you want to get a head start, please feel free. But the idea of assignment 3 is when you make different seat selections, the number in that drop down will change, and you can go through and calculate what the price of the booking is going to be. So just have a look at the lab. So I've got a couple of examples. So the box model, this is a this is one way of making sure your page doesn't get overstretched. So if you want to put a maximum width on your body element, in fact, I think I have got that example. I'll just pretend I'm on a larger screen here. I'll just press minus. So what I've done is I've actually set a maximum width for my body element, so it doesn't get beyond this size. And you can pop in some wallpaper, or I don't know, maybe some movie posters in the background, or curtains, or something cool along the sides. And this is what the Tramcar restaurant have decided to do. So anyone not from Melbourne, in Melbourne we have trams, and a business decided, hey, wouldn't it be great if people could have dinner on a tram and look out the window? And yeah, they don't want this to get too big, so they put in wallpaper on larger screens. So Robert's saying you're a little bit confused as to pricing. So assignment 2, what I'm expecting you to do is to think about attractive ways of displaying the price to customers. So it might be tempting to say, oh, there's the table, I'll just copy the table over. It's a little bit boring, a little bit like Microsoft Excel. So a few people have actually hit on quite attractive ways or interesting ways of displaying the prices. So maybe 2 price tables. So, you know, full price and discount price times. What I'm looking for is I've given you a price table, which has got all the information, and I'm looking to you to basically make it pretty, to sort of design sections that make the layout look nice. In assignment 3, those prices will be useful because we'll be doing programming to update a, if you like, a quote field. So your order will be $84 based on your seat selections. So honestly, assignment 2 is just a static page that yeah, there's definitely no JavaScript unless you're bored. I hope that helps. So I've also got some exercise inline blocks. So this is, if you like, the a way of making your pages responsive, if not fully responsive. So it means that your pages respond to different sizes, but may not be officially completely responsive. And so I've got this optional exercise because a lot of people are interested in flex and grid layouts. And I've got a couple of good tutorials. So CSS tricks is generally a little bit more advanced, but the W3 Schools one will get you started. And I promise you, sometimes you will see advice. They'll say, this was the old way of doing things. It's bad. Don't do it. But then you'll go to another page and they'll be doing it that way. So I do say, because I do notice that sometimes I'll be doing something with grid, and I will have to concede that sometimes something's better in flex, particularly if it's a one-dimensional layout. But the grid layout is, I promise you, is very good for two-dimensional layouts because it looks after alignment in both the horizontal and vertical directions. Now, I do have this this kind of it's like a sort of inflatable life raft. If assignment 2 is a complete disaster and you really have struggled in assignment 2, there is a very basic framework called Skeleton, and it's if you like, it's Bootstrap light, so it will provide you with styles, a minimum sort of set of styles, and that will make sure your third assignment doesn't look very bad. So if assignment 2 is too much for you, you know, you just say, I'm just not a designer, you may want to look at Skeleton to make your third and fourth assignments look good. But I really do want to stress this: do not use Bootstrap because that does too much CSS styling. Tim, actually, no, and I have to agree with you there. I think I know Flex sometimes, and then I'll just find out it's doing something that I'm just not expecting it to do. Web, yeah, this so this is, if you like, the fully responsive web design. So again, CSS tricks is pretty good for sort of like an advanced one, but W3 Schools does offer a tutorial. And this is another thing you can see in my page. Let me just get it back to normal size. I'm actually using Font Awesome. These are actually Font Awesome content. So it's Font Awesome. They hijacked the italic tag because when they were creating it, the italic tag had been deprecated. Unfortunately, so instead of it being italic, it's icon, I for icon. But the I tag is back in HTML5s, but it still works. What they have is they have a number of different scalar vector graphics icons, and if you attach this style sheet, it will actually pop in. It will pop in an icon into your field. Have I got one for YouTube? Yep. So they've got a YouTube icon, and they've got lots of different icons. So like little people, pencils, booking, telephone, all sorts of little icons. And here, stop it. Cancel. These ones are actually emojis. So I've noticed these display differently in different browsers. So if you want to have like little icons in your website, definitely have a look at Font Awesome. It's pretty good. And as Miloslav's just pointed out, it's a lot easier than making icons in Photoshop. Although I will have to say, I found myself taking, say, 2 icons and then realizing there isn't one for what I'm looking for. And I've ended up trying to make an icon look like a Font Awesome icon. I usually fool the less design focused clients, but I can tell it's not the same. So that's pretty much today's chat. So I'm hoping that I've covered a lot of the tricks into getting the final pieces of your assignment worked out. I'm getting a few assignment extension requests. I do sort of like maybe process them. I try and look at them at least once a day, although I will say this weekend I was quite busy and I forgot on Monday to check. But generally, I am trying to process assignment requests. So if you need an assignment extension, just apply in the form that's in the header area in let me just show everyone in case you've missed it. So I'm just opening up Canvas at the moment. So if you need an assignment extension, just click here. Obviously, for small requests, maybe a couple of days. The excuse doesn't have to be that imaginative. If you do need a longer extension, just obviously put in a better excuse, maybe attach any evidence. And the reason why I'm asking you to fill in this form is so that if I'm audited, I can just basically direct the auditor to this form and they can go through and make sure I'm not being too generous or too soft or too strict. That's another thing that, you know, some lecturers do not grant extensions regardless. And so, you know, students just go to special consideration and get one anyway. So Miris, Darren, you're saying the form doesn't work for you. That's generally because you may be logged in under 2 profiles. So you have to be exclusively logged in. So try using the incognito window, and that when you log in, you should be able to access the form. So Miroslav's asking the deadline. How flexible is the Friday deadline? Okay, if you fill this in and it says, actually, I'll just do a dummy run now. So need an extension for assignment 2. It's the first time I'm asking. That just helps me, double check. There's an option here. I just need the weekend. Now, if you click next, your assignment has been granted and will be extended for this length of time. Check Canvas closer to the deadline and make sure you do all those things. So you'll notice that it's automatically approved. So if you just need the weekend, fill this in. Yeah, it will be approved at some point. But if you do need a longer extension, so less than 7 days, actually it's 7 days or less, I guess, then you're taken to a page that just says, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. If you need just the weekend, go back and select that option. So what actually happens is I update your deadline on Canvas. So just be careful. The deadline, and this has happened. I've extended someone's deadline and they haven't realized, and then they've been 2 weeks late with their assignment because they thought that the deadline was the first, the original deadline. So excuse me, I'm just going to cough a little bit. Oh, where's the mute button? So the way Canvas works is there's an option to get the computer to calculate the late penalty, so I don't have to do the calculations. So what I do is I set the deadline, and then the late penalties are automatically applied. So the deadline you see will either be the original deadline or it will be the adjusted deadline. So keep an eye on the official deadline, which is in the assignment guide. And I think to actually say it here. So yeah, this document, that's got the official deadline, but your personal deadline will be different depending on whether you've got an extension or not. Robert is saying, do you lose marks if you submit the extension request? No, you definitely don't lose marks. No. The only marks you will lose is if your assignment is late and I haven't waived the deadline penalty. So in assignment 1, some of you, I have got some very late submissions, but because there was so much nonsense going on with assignment 1, it being, the approval taking so long, I kind of had unofficial approval to not apply deadline. Sorry, I'll say that again. Not apply late penalties for assignment 1. So if anyone's still sitting on 0.1, I think there's still 6 of you on 0.1 last time I checked. Honestly, just fix the problems I've stated and you won't get a late penalty for assignment 1. So that's just a shout out for the 6 students who are still having problems with assignment 1. Timothy's saying, can you submit assignment 2 as a HTML file? As long as the one on core teaching is a PHP file, because that's the one we'll be looking at. So it does need to be a PHP file because the scripts won't find the HTML file. And also make sure you name the files correctly. So if you call it capital I index file, index.php, the script won't find the file. So that's another issue. Actually, I'm just actually looking through the email. So I've just noticed. I don't know if Darren, is there a Darren here at the moment? So if your name is Darren and you've asked me for an extension, yeah, please fill in the assignment request form. But I will reply to you if once the chat finishes tonight. Okay, now that's another thing. I was trying to simplify the assignment by having all the files in the same folder. If you want to put your CSS inside a CSS folder and JavaScript inside the JavaScript folder, that's fine. It'll be a small problem, but it won't be an insurmountable problem. Oh, great to hear, Darren. I'm glad you got over that hump there. So yeah, I've actually got quite a few assignment requests. They're coming through now. So kind of like social media promotion campaign is working. Okay, so because this week is an assignment week, I will be, as much as possible, keeping a really close eye on the discussion forums. So please also keep an eye on the discussion groups. Lots of students ask questions. So often one student will ask a question, but it sorts out 10 students' problems. And also sometimes you'll get a response straight away. So another student might answer your question before I even get to it. So that's always nice. So if everyone's happy, I'll close tonight's chat and bid you all my best wishes for the assignment, which is due at the end of this week. So thanks for the thanks, Alexander, and also Miloslav. Brain broken, but thanks. Love it. Glad I've been helpful, Andre. And to you, Sonia. Oh, Tim, yeah. All assignment work is pre-production, so you can imagine that I'm a project manager, if you like, looking at a draft server. There will be no, if you like, I don't think there's going to be any assignment task related to optimizing your website for a production server. Maybe on the exam, that would be a good place for it, I'm guessing. And is that your last question, or is there another question coming up, Tim? So is that final question full stop or dot, dot, dot? That's the last one. Okay, that's good. Okay, so I'll see you all next week, and I will fire up Discord. So if anyone wants to have a chat, I'll be on Discord, say for the next half an hour or so, and happy to have a chat with anyone who wants to come over.